I'm Ewan Macmillan. I am 22. Helps if I remember my own bloody age. And I am a carer in my day-to-day. I'm a carer for my mum, and so I've got a lot of knowledge of the ins and outs of the DWP to my eternal displeasure. And yeah, I'm very politically active, member of the SNP, very left-wing, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm pretty sure everyone will answer the same to this, but yes, it's pretty good to be at the very least aware of politics, but especially engaged. You know, I'm always trying to, probably to some of my acquaintances' annoyance, trying to get folk engaged in politics. Probably like, oh, he's that one again, he's going to talk about politics. But yes, it is important, because as impotent as politics can make us feel at times when bad stuff's happening and we can't do anything. Actually, am I okay to swear?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. When bad shit's happening, and we can't do anything to stop it, we need to try, because maybe we will actually make a difference, and that's worth the world. Well, I'm an independent supporter. I mentioned that I'm an SNP member, so it's probably a given. I think that Scotland could be a more positive influence in the world than it is right now as part of the UK. I remember, I think it was back in the indie ref, Pat Kane, yes, the musician Pat Kane from Hue and Cry, talking about how Scotland could project its influence in different ways. The contrast he used was instead of having aircraft carriers projecting sort of military influence, that sort of hard force, why not, if Scotland had that sort of thing, we could make a hospital ship and go around the world sort of delivering aid. Maybe that's a fanciful thing, but it's the sort of underlying notion I really do like. The NHS as an institution has been brilliant. I mean, I mentioned that I'm a carer for my mum. We have a lot of dealings with the NHS. She's got a chronic pain condition, so that's pretty heavy involvement. I've had, the occasional issues with GPs, so that's kind of an independent issue of the NHS per se. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I don't know if talking down is the right word, term rather, of the NHS, and I mean, it's always important to be trying to improve continually. But if you're just browbeating it, that's not the right term, but if you're just basically beating it down, that's going to have a negative effect in itself. And I mean, there's all the talk of waiting times and that. Whereas, I mean, again, this is anecdotal, so it's not really great evidence per se. But I mean, I've been up at the PRI, the A&E at the PRI, and I've been, triaged before I even got the chance to sit down. I actually got called away to the room before I had a chance to sit down, and then seen by a full sort of doctor by no longer than 45 minutes. So I was pretty pleased with that. Doesn't change the fact that I was a wee bit bored in the waiting room, but I have a very short attention span, so that probably would have happened if I'd been waiting for 10 minutes. So, the NHS is invaluable. I mean, particularly, if it wasn't for the NHS, if it wasn't for free healthcare, when my mum developed a pain condition, our lives would have been ruined, irrevocably. So, I can't say it's not a good thing, because it has made our lives better, barring one arsehole of a GP. well, this is one of my sort of big things. And a lot of the time, people talk about, robots coming to take our jobs. And I think the Daily Mail ran with almost that as a headline, word for word. But I think that automation is an opportunity, actually, because there are a lot of spheres of human labour where it's if we can have humans not doing this, why wouldn't we? Dangerous things, or really unpleasant things. I don't think many people would object to less humans having to be involved in dealing with sewage, or robots being used for, if they were advanced enough and reliable enough, for dangerous things to rescue operation. Maybe in at sea or something, I don't know. But beyond that, there is an opportunity to be had, because not just an opportunity, but it's almost something that we have to address, because technology, as a rule, technology advances. You can't put a stopper on it. You can't try and legislate against automation. It's been tried before. You had Henry Ford and his automation of car factories, and unions were against it, politicians were against it, and yet it proceeded. It doesn't really, it just happens. And we need to find a way to address that, because we're getting to the point, and certainly when you take into account the automation of things like transport, which is a huge sector of employment, when you're taking into account things like haulage and that, as well as cars and personal transport, you need to address it, because you're going to get to the point where there aren't enough jobs for the number of people. That it's not even a matter of, if they work hard, they'll get a job, or if they do this. It's literally too many people, not enough jobs, and unless you're going with the rather evil cull the number of people route, you want to address the what do we do about the no jobs. So you need to, I think, look at valuing people beyond just the labour they can provide. It's actually kind of funny, and that was one of the things that was said about communism, that it would just reduce people to their labour. That's all they're just a cog in the machine. And I'm not a communist because I've got issues with the authoritarianism of, anyway, that's a sidetrack. But it's funny that they said that about communism, and yet under capitalist sort of politics and society, in a lot of ways, people have just been reduced to the labour they can provide determining the value. It's you'll only get this benefit if you're either looking for work or working, or you have to be, it's your work that matters. And if someone can't work, they do make gestures of support, and granted, disability benefits and all that sort of thing could be a lot worse. They could be better. And also this notion that you have to, that work is the only valuable way to contribute. It's but what about art? What about science? What about music? These are things that I don't think many bloody guidance counsellors, I can swear, any fucking guidance counsellors would say to the student, not guidance counsellors, sorry, guidance teachers, you know what I mean, would say, you should pursue this, it's definitely a viable career. Because it's not a steady, music isn't a steady source of income. But if you had something like a basic income, or, so many names about it, universal income, etc., that sort of thing, you could enable people to do things not just because they have to, not just because it's the only way to survive, but because it impassions them. And that is, I think, something that could really invigorate society. There was a paper by a futurist in the 1980s, which is a bit of an odd combination of terms. But it's called The Rich Economy. Did I say that clearly enough? The Rich Economy. It's by a guy called Robert Anton Wilson. And in it, he talks about how we need to sort of recognize this sort of continuing automation. And he refers to an idea called, this originally from Buckminster Fuller, called ephemeralization. That technology is about doing more stuff with less work. It's basically how the history of technology. And if we basically free people from the sort of constant grind of you have to do this to make enough to survive, then that could lead to a real sort of cultural and scientific renaissance in a way. And I think it would have innumerable positive effects for society. Yeah, it could potentially lead to a great sort of cultural and scientific renaissance in a way. You know, people being able to devote their time and their energy to things that they want to do, things that they are passionate about. And you get folk, I do understand it, but you get folk that say, oh, well, if people just had money given to them, would they even bother working? And it's like, I get that, because, there is this sense that, well, why would folk work if they didn't need to? But folk would do it because, frankly, leisure could get a bit boring. It seems a bit of an oxymoron, but they would, people would want to do things just because, though it might be characterised work, it interests them. It would be an effort, but it would be an effort that they would see as valuable, rather than, the drudgery that they're forced into doing in other circumstances. And just going back to this whole notion of automation being kind of an inevitable thing, there's an excellent video by a YouTuber called CGP Grey. We'll put a link in the description. We'll probably not put a link in the description, but you can find it somewhere. He's a pretty big YouTuber. It's called Humans Need Not Apply, and it's looking in much greater depth than I have, or than I remember the statistics to do, into how automation replaces human labour, and particularly about how it doesn't. People might say it replaces it. Oh, you get new jobs that never existed before, like computer scientists and that, but they're never in the same proportion, because it used to be that most of the human population was involved in some way in agriculture. Now it's a tiny percent. And it's not like that's been replaced by combine harvester engineers. That's a very small proportion in comparison. So this problem isn't something that can be, we can't say, oh, we'll find a way to make jobs and employment work, because it's a fundamental shift in how labour will work in society. And yeah, I am in favour. I am in favour of what gets called a post-work society, where people don't work because they have to, but because, they want to. Aliens, and yes. I suppose it depends on how you're considering the word threat. Because if you're considering it in the really sort of direct sense of an actual sort of military threat of groups and entities, if you will, then I'd say that the main threat is, you've got cyber threats, for which Trident is, pretty useless because it doesn't do much for cybersecurity, and indeed there are some questions over its own cybersecurity. And on the sort of more physical end, you've got like non-state groups, like you have Daesh and like extremist groups and that. And how can Trident defend against them? Because the whole principle of nuclear deterrence is to basically threaten a state actors population centres. And if you've not got population centres, much as Daesh like to claim they're a state, then how can you do that threat? I mean, you get people talking about, you should just nuke such and such city in the Middle East off the map. And it's like, aside from being horrifying in so many ways, that sort of callous disregard for human life, it just wouldn't work. If anything, it would make the situation unbelievably worse. Because you've just nuked a bunch of innocent civilians with maybe a few terrorists siding in amongst them, probably in every likelihood not even known to the citizens, despite how much they might claim, they're sheltering them or whatever. Yeah, it's farcical. I mean, the only threat that nuclear weapons can conceivably protect against is another state that is acting rationally. And that's not terribly much of a threat in the modern day. I mean, there's talk about Russia, but that's not really how Russia is being a threat. Again, back to cybersecurity, things like that. And I'll be the first to admit I've not looked into that whole aspect of Russia much at all, because so many other things to deal with. But yeah, I don't see how Trident is an adequate response to the needs of modern day security. In addition, there are lots of folk that say that Trident somehow supports the troops, and I'm really not sure about that, especially given that if you really, really wanted to invest that money in the military rather than, invest it in elsewhere, but if you were wanting to invest that money in the military, why not directly support the troops with better resourcing, better armour or whatever? Why protect the troops through some nebulous nuclear umbrella when you could just protect them with actual protection? Just a thought. Yes I do. Particularly, I mean, there are the obvious areas, healthcare. I personally, this is maybe me just having a personal bugbear about it, but there was a Conservative MP called David Tredinnick who sat for some amount of time, a couple of years I believe, I could be mistaken about that, but he sat for some amount of time on the Science and Technology Committee in Westminster. This is a man who is on the record as believing that astrology should be used to increase the efficiency of the NHS. He has stated in Parliament, and this is unbelievable, he has stated that he doesn't believe that blood clots under a full moon, which is just witchcraft, basically. And, and also I think he's an advocate of, I think he said that he supports traditional Chinese remedies, and I get the feeling there's probably a note of racism in that, but he supports traditional old remedies because basically they're old, the standard pseudoscience. And he was on the Science and Technology Committee. It is farcical, basically, that he was there and that he was having an influence over that sort of policy and debate. We shouldn't be funding any sort of medical, and this happens in Scotland, because I'm pretty sure there's a homeopathic, at least some degree of funding for some homeopathic pish in Edinburgh or Glasgow. And let's be clear on this. Homeopathy is bullshit. It is unquestionable that is the case. It does not work. It is adding water to basically random substances and claiming they claim science, but it's basically claiming that magically it'll help. And that's getting funding. Not a huge amount, it's worth saying, but any is a bit ridiculous in my eyes. In other realms, you've got things like drug policy. I think it was Tony Blair, I wasn't really politically involved at the time, but Well, it definitely wasn't, because it was like early teens. Or actually, now that I think about it, he got in when I was like 4. Fuck. But Tony Blair, I think, one of his campaign promises at one of the campaigns was about a science-based drug policy. And he did institute that sort of, he did get a full sort of investigation into what drug policy should be based on, actual scientific evidence. And then he found that it wouldn't be popular with the public, so he quietly shuffled it off to the side and went along with, drugs are bad, okay? Which is not really a great way of doing things, because surely your drug policy should have some relation to the harm that a certain substance does. And there's no real case to be made that is actually how our drug policy works. It's basically public opinion, which, public opinion is important, democracy, etc., etc. But so is evidence. Evidence matters. You can't legislate on topics, especially topics deeply intertwined with science, and disregard scientific evidence. It's farcical. And even out with the sort of directly science-related areas, health, drug laws, things like that, there are also areas where scientific evidence should come into play. Like, this is, I understand that people are entitled to their views on spirituality, that sort of thing, but I have always found mediums and these sort of people that claim that they can talk to your long-lost loved ones and give you some closure, I find that deeply disturbing, because either they genuinely believe this, and who knows, maybe they can, and that upends my entire view of the world, but in that case I would like some proof, please, because science. But if they don't believe it, then they are very cruelly taking advantage of people's bereavement and people's grief to enrich themselves or just get attention. It's sick, frankly. And I don't see why it's essentially fraud. I don't see why it's not considered such. It is a con. We deal with cons in other areas. If someone swindles a sort of vulnerable older person out of their savings by saying that they'll be able to treble it, we take that to task. We don't think that's acceptable. So why can they get money off of people for giving them, by lying to them? It's wrong. I mean, I get that some people will get closure from it, and I suppose that is good in a way. But the whole system it's exploitation, and that's not right. Lastly, I think that obviously the peddling of pseudoscience, often masqueraded as real science, they claim that, it's got such and such study backing it, but it's like it hasn't been reviewed properly or undergone the right scrutiny, and it's just not above board. It undermines the ability to actually have reliable knowledge, because in a lot of politics, it's opinion. Fundamentally, it's opinion. Different worldviews, and like right and wrong. You can't science away at morality. You can maybe take some of the logic people are using to justify it and apply science to it. Different matter. But fundamental question of morality, you can't really apply science to them. Fair enough. But lots and lots of things, like say climate science, the clue's in the name. You kind of can apply science to science. So we need a greater regard for evidence that isn't just so-and-so says this, but it's actually gone through rigorous testing and methodology. I mean, don't treat it as some absolute holy grail, because it's not always right, but equally don't take it's not always right to mean I can pick and choose what I want to believe in total, counterpoint to any evidence. Maybe we should be talking to more scientists, on things like Question Time. I think there was the figure of like Nigel Farage had been on this was a few years ago, but Nigel Farage had been on Question Time more than all doctors and scientists combined. And given that they probably discuss health and things like that not infrequently, that's a bit ridiculous. So, yeah, science needs more regard in how we sort of basically, govern and go about our politics. It's important. Like I said to you earlier, the flippant response would be, can I get a selfie? But I already have a couple. I mean, it's a valid response, be bold, that sort of thing. But it's not really terribly specific. And it's, at this point, maybe a little bit trite. I wouldn't necessarily know what to say. Like, if I was seriously, giving advice of some kind, rather than just talking. Because there were so many conflicting questions and issues and ideas that it's hard to know how to go forward. I would say maybe always make sure to be open and accountable. Always make sure that you not only say what you're doing, but you explain why you're doing it, or what's led you to that. And actually, something that not enough people in politics do is be willing, sometimes, to say that you're not sure, to say that you don't quite know, because that's human. I'd rather someone admit that they don't really know what they want, what the answer to a question is, than pretend that they do, because that's fake and it's damaging.